2022 Leadership Lab speaker series. And who better to start this off with than David J., the Chief Mobilization Officer of the Center for Humane Technology and one of LookUp's amazing impact partners. I can't say enough about the ways that David has brought many youth to us to work in this common bond to create a more humane and ethical world, digital world, but world in general. So just to give you a little bit, I'm Susan Reynolds. I'm the co-founder of LookUp, and this leadership lab, it's our third leadership lab, but it's a little bit different. We really are expanding it to be able to bring all of you youth advocates, storytellers, innovators together with more opportunities to collaborate, to listen to speakers, to come to workshops, to lead workshops. And so we're really thrilled to have you all here. You can be able to throw your questions into the chat, and David will speak for a little bit, and then we will have a Q&A type give and take, so you can really have a discussion with David as he explains the landscape of humane technology, of digital well-being, of this movement to create the digital world we all want to live in. And so he's going to give you the landscape, but also different opportunities. LookUp is one opportunity. There's so many, and how we can all work together and really build this movement. So with that, David is the Chief Mobilization Officer of the Center for Humane Technology, but he really is the spark behind creating communities to come together and really make a difference. So with that, David, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Susan and Sam. It is always such an honor to be invited to speak with you all. And I wanted to share today just some of my story, how I've come to understand building movements, starting from when I was, I think, in the place that a lot of you all are at, and really lead to the profound movement for humane technology that is unfolding all over the world right now, that I think I've been privileged enough to get a front row seat to, and the ways in which young people and the leadership of young people is becoming more and more central to that movement. Because what I really want you all to understand is how amazing a moment we're in to be taking action, to be shifting policy, to be building new technology, even just to be building ways to support the people around us. And how all of those things can come together to make some deep and catalytic change. So I think my story with this movement and with movements really starts in 2002, long time ago. And I was 2001, 2002. I was my first year at undergrad at a school called Wesleyan in Connecticut. And I had spent the past 4 or 5 years of my life really coming to terms with my own identity. I identify as asexual. And at that point, I'd never talked to another asexual person, never talked to anyone like me, and was really scared. I was scared there was something wrong with me. I was scared that I was going to be alone my whole life. And so I made a website called asexuality.org that was just a place to try to find other people who shared my experience. And what I found was, I remember seeing, like, having this deep feeling that I was alone, and for the first time seeing someone else who was going through what I was going through. And I remember how transformative, how powerful that was to get sort of my first email from someone who really was feeling what I was feeling. And I helped to build a whole community of people who were coming together to explore identity. And I saw how the internet could be this really powerful way for us to support one another, for us to share stories that weren't getting told anywhere else. And that when we came together to share those stories, not only was it personally transformative, not only was it something that I think was had a really beautiful and positive impact on my life, it built power. And it built power that could change the world around us. And I got to see how we went from supporting one another to changing, to creating education so that we weren't invisible, to changing the way that the American Psychiatric Association thinks about mental disorders, to changing, I don't know if any of you have seen TV shows. We're starting to have asexual characters represented there, and demisexual and other ace spectrum characters. And I say that, why am I talking about queer kids? Because the internet and us building deep relationship on the internet was the thing that made that possible. And I said to myself, look, I want to spend my life doing this. I've seen the power of bringing people into relationship, and I've seen the power of bringing people into relationship through technology. So I learned how to build, how to design product and do UX. I already knew some development, but I sort of taught myself to code to the point where most of my jobs were as a developer. And I sort of set out to build technology that would help people build relationships. And what I found was, I remember I was working for sort of the innovation office at Samsung, building some, well, actually, no, I'll go a little bit earlier. So as I was starting to build technology, there was this startup that was interested that I kind of got a conversation with to see if I wanted to talk to them, because they were also talking about building relationships. They were called Facebook. This was 2008. And I remember having a conversation with someone from Facebook, and I said, I'm really excited about how to get people into deep conversation with one another, how to help them build trust, how to help them build relationships. And the person from Facebook was like, let me tell you about the money I'm making. Let me tell you about the car I've got, like the fancy new car I just bought. Let me tell you about how quickly we're growing all over the world. And I was like, no, that's not the thing that matters to me. And so I went and worked for places like Mozilla. I went and worked for in scientific communities doing stem cell research, and watched how all of the things that I saw that were about building deep connection between people were the opposite of where the industry was headed. Everything was headed to focus on feeds, that got as much attention out of people as possible, but didn't give them room to go deep and build trust, didn't create small containers where people could talk to one another about the things that mattered. And and as I saw this deep misalignment and began to see the really profound and terrifying impact it was having, not only on individual mental health of people in my community, but on the ways that was having increasingly terrifying impacts on our democracy, I started at first advising and then working with the Center for Humane Technology. And we are an organization, we sort of came out of the work of someone named Tristan Harris, though at this point we were kind of expanded far. He's still a place of evil. We've expanded far beyond his ideas. And he was, we really focus on the impact of technology that extracts human attention. And we were not the first to talk about that. There's been decades of really good scholarship about it, but we, I think in part because we are, because we come from we come from the tech industry, so we're seen as sort of insiders who can speak with credentials, and for a few other reasons, including some amount of, I think, privilege, we got picked up by the press. And so we became, through the media, through the documentary, The Social Dilemma, we kind of became at the center of a discussion about the unforeseen consequences of technology that extracts human attention. And as the head of mobilization, I was in charge of, I was hired, and they said, look, we get out and we talk about the problems with technology, and then all these people show up and they want to do something about it. And we don't know what to do with all those people. So can you figure out how to give all of these people who are showing up something to do, give them some resources so they can be making really deep systemic change. And there are a huge range of ways as a movement builder that I've been able to do that. I've been able to get people into small discussions that have led to new organizations being founded. I've mentored leaders who are doing internal advocacy from inside of the large platforms who've left and now started new organizations that are doing outside advocacy. I've advised policymakers around the world. I've worked with a wide range of startups. We just launched a course called Foundations of Humane, or we're actually just about to launch, it's in beta right now, a course called Foundations of Humane Technology, which teaches people how to, and I'll drop a link to that in chat quickly, that teaches people who are building products how the principles that they can apply to the product development process to account for the individual mental health of their users, to understand the impact that their product could have on creating the shared understanding that democracies need to function, to understand how you can build products that support shared understanding, to understand how the ways in which systemic racism and sexism tend to show up in the product development process so that we can understand how to counteract them. So we've been doing this work, really trying to support people building humane technology. And one theme I think that has come up again and again and again as I've been privileged enough to sort of be a hub in this movement of all these people who are showing up is the transformative role that young people can play. So I'll give a few examples, and then I will. I'm really excited to open up for questions and dialogue. So I was having a conversation, and I can't say which platform, but one of the sort of largest social media platforms in existence is growing really quickly, and they I had a conversation with them and they said, look, one of the things that matters most to us is understanding the impact of our product on mental health. And one of the real challenges that we have is that we want to understand, like a lot of our users are young people. When we want to understand the mental health of young people, we wind up talking to a lot of experts who are like over 40. And they have good research to share, but we need young people who are steeped enough in this that they can, like, who can not only share their experiences, but share the experiences of the communities around them, and really who have the skills to help us understand how to approach these really complex challenges designing around mental health. When I talk to policymakers, I will have these sort of behind the scenes conversations with Senate and congressional offices, and they'll say, at least here in the US, and I'll talk about a little bit about other countries because there's similar dynamics there too, but here in the US, I'll talk to policymakers and they'll say, look, there's a lot of issues happening around tech. There's, whether we break up the big tech companies, there's Section 230, which is about whether we can hold them liable for posting bad stuff. The issue that has the most bipartisan support that everyone can agree on is that humane technology is the technology that exists today is harming kids. That's what parents are calling their representatives about across the political spectrum. So they're saying what we really need is to have legislation, like if we can create legislation that's about protecting kids, that also helps to restructure the industry, also helps to align the incentives towards building the kinds of technology we want. That's the most politically feasible way to make real structural change in the industry. And when they get together in the back rooms that I'm sometimes invited into, to have a bipartisan discussion about how to build, how to have policy that reshapes the technology landscape, they really want the voices of young people in the room. For the same reason, right? There's plenty of policy experts who are sort of my age who are happy to come in and talk about what's best for young people, but they need but we know that we're not enough to make those decisions. That's why I don't know if you all have been introduced to folks like Technically Politics that are aggregating that are sort of doing story banking, like doing interviews with people about their experience with social media, and then helping to package them and support advocates who are then learning to speak to lawmakers. That work is really, really critical. And so when I think about the role of, when I think about what we really need to make to change the to create really deep systemic change in the way that technology is built, we need a shift in policy, and young people and youth leadership has a really important role to play in that. We need a shift in the technology being built, and you all have a really important role to play in that. There is many of the products that define, the companies that define the technology landscape today were started on college campuses. And the people who are going to define, well, that next generation of technology are on campuses learning how to build technology today. There's already a movement, something called the Public Interest Technology University Network, that is of professors from computer science and other related departments who are trying to teach people who are learning to code how to code in the public interest. And a lot more is needed to be able to really shift how we talk about building technology in the way that we're doing in our course, in the way that you all are talking about as leaders in LookUp, in the way that that university professors are thinking about, to include an understanding of the principles necessary to build technology that helps people's lives and doesn't that helps people's lives and doesn't undermine our mental health and our democracy. And finally, and this is, I think, what I know some of your projects are probably going to focus on, and I'm going to come back to it as, I think, in my experience in movement building, often the center, often the seed that everything else comes from, is providing support. So remember, I was talking about how everything started for me when I felt alone and scared, and try to create a place where people like me could come together to just support one another. And that from that process, we were transformed. And from that process, we built trusted relationships that could transform the world around us. When I think about building, and we see this happening some in our community, when I think about how do we transform how technology is built? One of the most powerful things I see people doing is creating places where people who are learning to build technology come together to just support their own mental health around the technology they use. Because a lot of them have relationships with technology that aren't what they want. A lot of them are struggling the same way that everyone else is struggling. And when they can get the tools to support one another, when they can understand what it takes, what it takes for them to be in balance, that then becomes, those values become baked into the technology they build. The technology we build always winds up reflecting the values we hold, and the values we hold are often what we take from the struggles that we've gone through. And so when we help people, when we create a place where people can be and struggle together, those places wind up becoming communities that with shared values that have a lot of power. Same politically. I found that if I show up and I say, hey, we're going to go try to change this law, and who wants to come help us do it? There'll be people who show up, and they're often like, they're already really motivated, engaged, overachieving people, right? But when I can also create a space that says, let's talk about the things we're struggling with. Let's create space to explore those, to support one another. And then once we've explored those and supported one another, if we feel like taking the struggles we've gone through and using them to make change, the leadership that comes out of that, the dedication to the level of work is much, much deeper, because people know one another. People have skin in the game. And so I would, in my experience, the most powerful transformative work, both individually and societally, comes from that place of vulnerability. It comes from that place of supporting one another. And so my call would be to you all, is that this is a tremendous time to be changing the way that technology is being built, and that one of the most powerful tools you have to do that is to build power by supporting one another and seeing what comes of the trust, what comes of the transformation that flows from that support. And with that, I will pause. I'm happy to take any questions. And once again, it's just a huge honor to be here with you all today.
David, thank you so much. That was very inspiring, and also just makes me think about how I move through the world myself and build community, and how to be vulnerable, and how to sort of create all those things. And a very helpful reminder that technology can be connective for us, I think, and especially going back to the beginning of your story and being able to find community and find support. It's just really, it's a good reminder sometimes when we focus on the overwhelm or the other pieces of it. With that, I know there are four people already lined up in the queue. I know, Yoel, you put your name in first, and she's graciously going to let me have Shivani actually go first, because Shivani has to leave in a minute. So Shivani, feel free to unmute yourself and put your video on and ask David.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for those opening words, David. It was really great to hear from you. I've had the awesome opportunity to speak with you in the past.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually kind of how I got connected with LookUp. So thank you.
Awesome. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you as well. For those of you who don't know me, I do work with LookUp. I'm on the Youth Leadership Council, and I'm currently the Director of Programs and Partnerships. I also run our podcast, which is called Gen Z's Digital Decalogue. It's a really fun we explore everything from the metaverse to the nuances of digital well-being and mental health. And so it's kind of this whole, I like the name Decalogue just because it refers to, sort of rules and laws. And I think that's something that we're working on defining almost for ourselves within the podcast. And that's definitely the sort of premise of it. And I just wanted to ask you, David, a little bit about something that I'm talking about, something that I'm dealing with right now, is sort of expanding my reach when it comes to advocacy. And so a lot of the problems that we're working on here at the YLC and in a lot of different projects we have are touching upon some of the negatives of social media and how we can balance that with a lot of the tech for good. So some of the particular problems that we're talking about is addiction, with that whole endless scrolling. We're talking a lot about insecurity and different ways it's affected young people's mental health. We've also been talking a lot about misinformation, in that personally, from a lot of my experience with peers, there's a lot of advocacy that goes on through the social media platforms, which can be great for those particular groups. But at the same time, it does sort of perpetuate a skew in opinion, a skew in terms of what that person is advocating for. And there's a lot of people who consume their news primarily on social media. In my age group, I know a lot of people, they just reshare a lot of these graphic slides, and they just rely on that as their source of information about a topic. And those can be highly opinionated, highly emotional. And so I guess my question is, a lot of the people that I've been trying to speak with, whether that's talking at schools and conferences, a lot of those people that really show up for the conversation are passionate, like you mentioned, people who are very interested in the movement or who've been doing a lot of self-reflecting. And I was wondering, how could we sort of expand and touch upon the work with people who might not necessarily see this as an issue, and kind of work with them to maybe figure out what their role is within this movement?
Great question. I wasn't certain what question you were going to land on, so I have a few different answers, but I would say the thought that comes to mind, and I will see if I can make this applicable, is that at CHT, at the Center for Humane Technology, we have a policy, which is when we get on social media, we get on to invite people off. So we don't get on to keep up with the world, because the feeds are very skewed. We're looking at this very distorted version of the world. So if we want to learn about the world, we go to sort of places that are more curated to learn about it. And we don't get on to try to build our audience or or get engagement, because then we get caught up in this treadmill that I think can have a really bad impact on us as an organization. But if we're doing something and we think that that thing could be a place where people can go deeper than social media lets you go, then we'll get on and we'll post it because we want to invite people into that place, like something like this sort of conversation with LookUp. And so I would think about something I have seen when engaging with people who are kind of influencers, either professionally or politically, is that they operate in a world where there's very little room for vulnerability. And because of that, they often have a big defensive layer around that sort of vulnerability. And often they have a performance of vulnerability. Like if they're asked to be vulnerable, be like, cool, I've got my safe vulnerability performance. That's, and so I think I've had my instinct as an organizer in those times is to say, look, when I engage with you, I'm going to let myself be like, and we're just in a room having a conversation. I'm going to let myself be vulnerable a little bit in a way that hopefully gets beyond what is normally okay for someone who lives in that social media world. And I'm just going to see if they meet me there. Like, I'm not going to go big. I'm just going to like take a baby step and see if they meet me there. And if they do, then I can invite them to have a conversation that maybe about the way that, like, about their relationship with technology and the struggles they have within it, because I know those struggles exist, even if I haven't earned the trust to see them. And maybe just about something else that they're not able to talk about. But if we can get to the point where a place where I can get past their sort of performative shell, then often we can build a lot of trust, and often we can do some really powerful work together. And so I would, and they can bring some really important skills. They can bring some really important capacity to the work. But I find that if I haven't, if I haven't gotten to connect with them on a vulnerable and personal level, then it can be difficult to sort of meet one another in the values that we share.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a fair answer to your question.
Yeah, I mean, definitely is. I think it makes a lot of sense. The previous sort of ways I've been trying to sort of integrate this idea of visual well-being into schools and things like that have really been through large like conversations where there's me standing on a stage and I'm talking to a lot of people in a very almost formal environment. And I can definitely see how that lacks a lot of vulnerability. And we talk more about the full science behind it. We talk a lot about the tech behind it, the business behind it. And I feel like maybe pushing that personal side might be really helpful into me working with a lot of young people my age. So thank you. I definitely think that's something I'd love to incorporate.
And can I do a quick follow-up to that? I want to be mindful of other people's time.
Sure.
In my experience, I've also given a lot of talks on campuses. The magic happens in the after space. So after I give a talk, and this I often am doing this on college campuses, but if there's a way to arrange it in high school too, after I give a talk, there's a handful of people who like come and really want to talk to me. And if I can have a place to go and get a snack with those people and hear their stories, that's where new leaders come from. That's where relationships that really make change come from. That's where the most powerful work happens, is in that after space. And it happens in personal storytelling in that after space. One of the things that a sort of famous theorist about social movements talks about a lot is the idea that movements flow from people telling personal stories to one another. And so one of the things, that's part of why when I started today, I wanted to start by telling you my personal story. If I can tell a story about where I come from, the values that drive me, and the sort of story of struggle behind those values, then you'll be able to understand me, and you'll also be invited to tell your own story about your own struggle. And those stories are what are really good at building the trust it takes to do work together. Also, I just saw that Celine's here. Hi, Celine.
Awesome, thank you. It was great talking to you and meeting all of you guys. Actually, I have to head off to class now, but it was great seeing you all. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for a great question, Shivani, and also just a wonderful answer. I love that that part that you added at the end, magic happens in the after space, David. It's so true. Such a nuanced narrative build and really a give and take. Yoel, thank you for the patience. If you want to unmute yourself and turn your camera on and ask your question.
Sure. Hi, David. It's very nice to see you again. I saw one of your calls this September. I met you there, and you actually referred me to Emma Lemke, who goes to my school at WashU. And I'm very grateful for that connection because now I'm doing the video editing for Technically Politics. So it's been really quite the full circle moment here. But also, as just a little bit of background around me, I create films about human connection, and a lot of the work that I do involves one-on-one conversations about exactly that vulnerability and hearing people's stories. It's exactly the foundation for what I do. So as I'm building out my idea for a sort of youth response to the social dilemma, I think some of the things that you're talking about has very much hit home with me. Having been someone that has deleted social media senior year of high school out of just fear for what it's created for me and my friends and the kind of addiction that it's caused. But with the opportunity to be with you today, I did want to ask you, you mentioned with a tech leader so far, they've been interested in hearing about what kind of work that you're doing and how they can promote more mental health. Could you speak a little bit more about how willing have tech leaders that you've spoken with been to engage in these conversations about humane tech and changing sort of their business models to prompt a more ethical future for technology?
So let me talk at a high level. I'm trying to think of like what's okay to share here. I think I can talk at a high level about what's going on inside of TikTok because it's pretty typical. So and I think mirrors a lot of what's happening inside of Snap and what's happening inside of a bunch of other places. So TikTok imperative is to grow as quickly as possible around the world, right? Their TikTok and their parent company ByteDance are moving into countries as quickly as possible. They're trying to acquire users as quickly as possible. They're trying to build an algorithm that gets people to watch as much TikTok as possible and improve that algorithm constantly. And they have arguably the best recommendation system in the world at getting people to watch a lot of movies, a lot of videos, and to spend a lot of time, which, as we know, can be not great for mental health and for a lot of other things. But they've gotten really good at it. So there's a lot about the sort of DNA of TikTok that is not great for the values that we hold and the things that we care about. That being said, the leaders of TikTok are, humans who don't want to hurt young people. They just don't see that creating a really addictive algorithm they don't see that as particularly harmful. They see it as a bunch of young people are creatively expressing one another and then seeing the content they like. So they say, yeah, we want to protect youth mental health. And to them, that means we want to stop the worst things from happening. We want to stop people from promoting anorexia. We want to stop people from like really intense cyberbullying. They're like, okay, we imagine there's this like sliver of bad stuff on the edge and we want that bad stuff taken away. And we know that if we have that bad stuff there's all these legislators, all these regulators who are going to who really care about youth mental health, who are going to come and regulate our company. So if we can avoid having just the worst headline-worthy mental health problems on our platform, then that sure would be great. And I don't think that they realize what I would say, which is when you do what you're doing, when you build an algorithm that is getting people to spend as much time as possible on TikTok, you're intrinsically increasing the likelihood of all of those negative outcomes. You're intrinsically increasing social isolation. So they think that you can, so they don't realize that. So with that understanding of, okay, we just want to stop the absolute worst stuff from happening on our platform, they go and they hire a bunch of people for something called trust and safety. And their job is to make the bad stuff go away on TikTok. And those people hire people to do something called responsible innovation. And those are people whose job is to go around the inside of TikTok and talk to all the product teams and like help them understand how the things they're building are might have a negative impact on mental health. And when they go to hire those people, they go to nonprofits. They go to people who've spent their lives fighting for youth mental health, and they say, hey, do you all want to make 5 times more money than you ever made, impacting millions of lives around the world? And some people say yes to that. Some people will say like, yeah, we're really skeptical at the impact of TikTok, but we want a version of TikTok we want to try to make it better if we can. So you have some really good internal advocates inside of those companies who are fighting tooth and nail to try to make it better against a business model, against a set of imperatives that are
Someone's here to check our roof.
Oh, someone's here to check our roof. Well, I've got to talk to some people right now.
No, but we want to know who it is. And
Yeah,
why
it's okay.
you-
It's okay. And but I can talk to the person when I'm done on this phone call. Okay, Tabby? Yes, yes. Sorry about that. Tabby, could you close my door, please? Could you please close my door? Sorry. That's my daughter. So there is getting back my train of thought. So TikTok. So you have these people, their bosses are telling them, yes, please do what you need to do to protect youth mental health, but don't mess with our growth and don't mess with our business model while you're doing it. So there's an intrinsic tension that those teams have to face. And I've seen that same tension play out inside of Facebook. I've seen it play out inside of most companies where you can, they have sort of cover to handle the worst stuff, but not to really deal with the deeper problems. And that's why I think building new technology, there's really important good work that can happen inside of the large platforms. And I fully support the people who are doing it. And if we really want to shift the incentives, we want to shift the way this technology is operating, it's going to have to happen through new platforms, not through the ones that we have. That was kind of a long answer, but I hope that's helpful.
It's extremely helpful. Thank you. I'd never had that perspective before, that we need new technologies. It's like these technologies are kind of beyond help, it seems like, at this point. So it's very interesting and inspiring to hear that there are people on campuses now building the future. So thank you.
And I'll just say, like, it feels like they're all powerful. When I was in college, it felt like Microsoft was all powerful. It felt like Microsoft was just going to own software forever. And then 3 years later, that wasn't true. And a few years ago, it felt like Facebook was going to own social networking forever. And now, with the rise of TikTok and a few other things, that like they're going to play a role, but they're not in charge. So we're in an industry that like fundamental shifts happen all the time. And I think the question is, how do we shape the inevitable fundamental shifts that are happening so that they can be building the technology that we most need?
It's a really good question, Yoel. Ryan, you were in the queue next, so feel free to unmute and turn on your video.
Yeah, I was just curious about things like nonprofits, like you just talked about. I was wondering if you think like our role is right now, like if nonprofits are like the best way to like affect change, like at a systematic level, and if we need to find like new measures besides just solely growth that, you know, really reflects human value and like what we really want to prioritize.
So I think there's a spectrum. I think nonprofits have a really important role to play, especially in and I think building the community and lifting up voices that are not heard in the way the technology is developing, and often in developing technology themselves. There's another group that doesn't get talked about a lot, but that I think is a really, really critical role to play is government. So whether you're looking at the digital service, US digital service, I'm going to give the US examples. I know there's equivalent ones elsewhere in the world, but the US ones are the ones I'm most familiar with. US digital service, which is just taking really smart technologists and embedding them in government to help to improve the services that governments offering. So we think of government tech as like kind of sleepy, but they are incentivized to do exactly the kind of public service that technology needs to be doing. When you build tech for government, you're not just building it for whatever group of people happen to use your app. It needs to work for everyone. And so there's a really different ethos that goes into government tech that's really positive. I'm friends with some of the people who went in to, I don't know if you all were around for this, when healthcare.gov got launched, at first it was a huge disaster. And this like rapid response team got brought in to fix the website. One of the highest stakes government websites ever to go up. And they did a phenomenal job. One of my friends was one of the people who was brought in for that rapid response team who fixed it. They now have a group where they just go around fixing different websites that the government uses to, and I think governments around the world use to help people. And that's the real, whether you're doing it at a federal level, you're doing something like Code for America that is doing that at a local and a state level. There's really powerful work to be done there. Another important place to look are B Corps. So most corporations are have what's called fiduciary duty to their shareholders, meaning that they are legally required to do whatever makes the most money for their shareholders. And there are some companies that have gone out of their way to not have that requirement. They've said, look, we are for profit, but we are a mission-driven for profit, and we want to be able to make less money in order to fulfill our mission. And they get a special legal status called the benefit corporation. Benefit corporations are, a lot of them work in sustainability. There's some really powerful ones that work in technology. I think the one that comes to mind right now is Marco Polo, which is an app for having face-to-face conversations with people. There's a lot of tech companies that are B Corps. If you look around there, they're a really interesting way to find companies that are going to be more values aligned. Because at the end of the day, nonprofit is a tax status. It just has to do with like, do you make money by asking foundations and donors, or do you make money by selling a service that people like? And you can sell a service that people like and still be really, really values aligned if you're saying, I'm going to sell this service, but I'm not out to make as much money as possible, get as big as possible. I'm out to have a positive impact to the service that I create. And I think there were and then the other place I would recommend looking if you're interested in this sort of mission-aligned tech organizations is an organization called Zebras Unite. Zebras Unite is a cooperative of organizations that are all choosing to prioritize their own values over the kind of rapid growth that most tech companies are told to engage in.
Thank you.
It's a really great question. And David, I think it's nice to know that there's so many people kind of in your corner when you're thinking about this. I know we have a number of applicants from the innovator experience here. So to know that you're not just doing this on your own. And I see Stephanie just put the Zebras Unite in the chat. So thank you, Stephanie. Our next person in queue was Kaylin. So feel free to unmute yourself and come on and ask David your question.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I just wanted to thank you too for like your focus on narrative. I am conflict analysis by trade, and it is not so often that storytelling and especially digital storytelling takes such a center stage precedent. So I really appreciate that, and especially how thorough the responses to your questions have been. I feel like I've already learned so much. So I guess I really wanted to focus on the PIT UN mention that you had brought up earlier. I've been developing or trying to develop PIT UN at my university for the past like 3 years. And I guess my question was, how can we provide more resources to students that are trying to develop PIT UN at their university level? Because it's such a admin process and it's super complicated, especially the funding piece. And I'm just like, I'm 21 years old. I started when I was 19 and dealing with this, like, you know, it's like $1 million project and it's really complicated. So how can we make it easier on students that are interested in doing so?
That is a really phenomenal question, and one that I feel, because I haven't been navigating that process in universities, I don't feel qualified to answer the logistical side. I'm sure you're in touch with some of the kind of Pitt UN leadership folks who probably could speak a lot more to that. The thing I'm a lot more familiar with is grassroots education on college campuses, which are finding ways to just bring people together and engage in curriculum. But if you want to talk about lasting curricular change, if you want to talk about sort of creating faculty positions that didn't exist before, which is real structural change, then I would. I want to be careful about not stepping beyond my expertise here. I think that the things that come to mind and the expertise I have, which may or may not be relevant to the question you're asking, is if there are many people who are building Pitt UN on your campuses, how can you all be effectively connecting with and supporting one another? How can you be sharing the struggles that you're going through? How can you be sharing the ways that you're learning? How can you be sharing stories of what's working? Because if you can take a story of what's working in one campus to your campus, then that's more likely to get the right buy-in from the right administrators to move things politically forward. And I can think of sort of tactics that would be helpful to bring people together to do that kind of story sharing. But before I dive into that, is that helpful to the question you're asking?
No, I completely think that's relevant. Even in the buildup of the program the Pitt UN program, a lot of that has been centered around my minor creation of ethical technologies such as AI ethics. So yes, I'd love to hear your answer.
Yeah, and what can I ask what university you're in?
I'm at George Mason University.
Oh, awesome. So I would, something that I have, I started doing a few months ago, and I know we've, Susan, you've been to a few of these, was just hosting happy hours of youth leaders who are working across the industry. And I wouldn't do them on Zoom. I would do them somewhere where people could sort of self-organize into small groups really easily. Because what you want is for people to come in. You want it to be like a kind of appetizer, like a potluck or something, where people sort of come in, they grab a plate of food, they say hi to 3 or 4 people, and they find someone they can really go deep with, and they go off in a corner with that person. You want a lot of deep conversations happening in parallel, not one big 20-person Zoom room where only 2 people are talking. This is great for broadcast out, but and so I'll put some software tools that I like to use that are free, that are helpful for those sorts of things. But I would see if you can find, I don't know if you're networked with other students who are specifically doing Pitt UN kind of curricular reform through Pitt UN. I would reach out and try to find one of those people who can co-host with you. And then if they're not already doing this, like just host an event where people can come together and informally talk to one another. And the platform I like to use is this for that. And you just have a link that you send out and people show up at a particular time. And it's free for, I think, up to 50 people, which should be more than you need. But I would do that. And if it works, I would do it once a month and get the Pitt UN people to email out the link and the time. And I think that could be, once you have people who are sort of already dedicated leaders who are doing stuff, just creating a regular place for people to come together and talk can be really transformative. And a lot of times you have someone at the middle who doesn't have the capacity to even just create that space. And so that could be helpful. I wish I had more advice on navigating university bureaucracy, but I don't want to overstep. You know way more than I do.
No, you're totally good. Thank you so much. That's such a good idea too. And dialogue is so valuable no matter what topic you're covering. And I appreciate the referral to the software.
Yeah, and the other thing, when you do that, and this is the same way if you're doing one of those after spaces like Shivani was talking about, when you do it, one of the most, like, it can be really light, but you want to have a good story about who you are and what you're doing. You want to have a story that's like, here's my name, here are my pronouns, here's where I'm coming from, here's the sort of a little bit vulnerable personal reason why I've dedicated myself to this work. And here's where I am in the work right now. And like, if you can say that in 2 minutes and you can open the conversation with that story, then just to build on our theme of storytelling, and then you have other people go around and share their stories, it'll quickly become apparent sort of where, so I'll tell my story. I'll have people go around and share their stories. And then I'll say, everyone find 1 or 2 people whose stories really resonated with you and run off with them. Because the temptation will be for everyone to stay in one big cluster, and then like no one really gets to talk and people don't really build trust. But if they find 1 or 2 people, then you're like, and whenever you feel like it, just, recluster and find another group. That's where some really deep conversations will happen.
Have you heard of Sensemaker?
No.
Sensemaker is, and I want to make sure I keep this short, but it is a platform that allows you to upload stories, and it maps them through data visualization.
Oh, cool. There's that can be really good if you're doing something like what Technically Politics is doing, which is you're harvesting stories from a community and you want to present them to a third party to make a case. If you want to build relationships, then you want to get people in the room telling stories live. But yeah, that sounds really cool.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kaylin. And I just sent this to Kaylin, but I'll throw my email in there. I came out of a university setting, so navigating that is not easy, and I'm happy to try to help add on to what great answer David just gave. We have a long queue, but I think we can maybe get through 1 or 2 more questions before the very end. So Celine, you messaged me. I know you've got one, so feel free to come on and ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for everything you said. I think it was really resonated. And I'll keep my question short because I think it could go long, but it's kind of a comment/question. And I think you talked about business model, which is really interesting to me. And I'm really curious how much, with organizations and companies you're speaking with, how much can the business model change, and how much, how impactful is it to have youth voices, and how much, how much impact can we see? And do we need, government to actually be much more involved to see a measurable difference in mental health? Because I think there's one part is just companies kind of checking off that box saying, okay, we got youth voices, let's see what we can do about it, and not really attentive to, okay, will this solution really help? And then I'll just add one thing is, when you're talking about creating new technologies, I'm also really curious, what does that, in some ways, does that create inequalities, create negating the effects that actually these old technologies or these old social media apps have on current users? So that was a lot, but let me know if you need me to repeat anything.
No. I'm gonna quickly answer in the form of a graphic, and this is how we think about it at CHT. That if we want to move this really big, complicated system, on a fundamental level, we need to change the code being written. But that code flows from a bunch of other, it's held accountable to internal governance, which is what are the incentives that, what are the KPIs that each team are building for, that tie to the business model, and I think really critically tie to the business model and the growth model. So it's not just how you make money, it's how you get new users. Or the internal governments. Those are shaped by regulation. Those are shaped, I think, by the overall business model, which is within the industry, how do you make money and how do you grow? And I think that this is both the business model of the companies and the investment model. So the way that you make, if you're a baby company, the way that you get money isn't just revenues through ads, it's going to investors to convince them that you're a company that's worth putting money into. And the way that you do that is you say, we are going to take this one small, tiny technology. We're going to rapidly expand to take over the entire world. We're going to do that without stopping to understand what the impact is, because we're going to take over the world really, really quickly if you give us $2 billion. And that's in order to get money, you have to tell some version of that explosive growth story. And so it's both shifting sort of the business model of how these companies make money. And we see a lot of that already happening. A lot of folks moving to subscription models, some really interesting new models emerging from the blockchain and Web3. And it's about the investment model. That investment model is also really sensitive to external regulation. When regulators, even if they haven't passed laws, if they suggest they're going to pass laws, that shifts a lot of how this investment capital is flowing and can help to shift it away from aggressive growth towards things that are more values aligned. Because whenever the regulation shifts, there's new kind of opportunity that emerges. This is really tied to the broader economic goal. So is the economic goal grow as quickly as possible, get as much attention as possible? Or is there a fundamentally different way that we think about creating value with technology? And the more we can get investors to think, oh, maybe the way to create investment with technology is to help people build deep relationships with one another. Maybe the way to create value with technology is to help people build shared understanding across lines of difference. And I think we're sort of newer to thinking about how that operates economically, why that's an economically valuable thing to do. But I think if we can have innovation in that, then it helps to shift how investors and people building products think about the possibility of a new piece of technology making money. And that's really critical. And then beyond that is just the culture and paradigm that we're operating in. Something we think about a lot, that shifts. So something we think about at CHT, and I don't want to be too dark here, is that we live in a culture and economic paradigm that assumes progress and growth. It assumes that what we're going to do is just keep growing and growing and growing forever. And our job is just to be one of the fastest in that growth race. And as we look at a world facing climate crisis, as we look at a world facing crises around democracy, we, I think, sometimes think this needs to be about resilience and survival. How do we think about how we grow in ways that allow us to survive and thrive in the face of disaster, as opposed to growing in ways that make us bigger? And that's a really different paradigm to approach from, but we're trying to understand for ourselves, what does that mean, and how can we invite people to think about that as an economic goal? So I'll pause there, but.
Thank you, that was great.
David, I think, are you able to stay for an extra?
Yeah,
minute?
I can stay for another few minutes.
Okay, I think to take advantage of that magic in the after space, and also because the next person in queue, it was 4 a.m. when they got on here.
Oh yeah.
So I'd love for his question to be answered. Cameron, do you want to come on and ask your question of David?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to ask. I'll be really quick. So my question is, just like it's been for quite a while, a lot easier to sell burgers and somewhat negative things than healthy things like salad. And I guess that's evidenced by McDonald's being the most valuable restaurant, at least in the US.
Yeah.
I think there are also inherent extra challenges associated with introducing better ethical technology. So do you work with these new technologies to help them launch, or what do you advise generally that they can do to outcompete the more harmful extractive applications of the technology?
I'm going to give two. So we help, I'd say, largely through our course. So the link that I put to Foundations of Humane Technology, we have a really active community around that course. We have events 3-4 times a week. We're bringing people together to talk about exactly this, support one another in building and launching new forms of technology. We don't have the capacity as a team to provide one-on-one individual support. But I think we definitely do. But we want to be able to, like LookUp, be building a supportive community to help people. I think implicit in your question too with the hamburger analogy is how, like, can we imagine a world in which ethical technology succeeds and even sort of becomes more powerful than other dominant forms of technology? And I think about transformations around renewable energy. I think about transformations in the automotive industry. I think about transformations in architecture. I think about, in some cases, transformations in food. Like, you can make a lot of money selling salad. And you can make a lot of money selling salad if there are a lot of people out there who have experienced firsthand what happens to your body when you eat a lot of bad food. And you can really communicate a sense of shared values with those people. So I think that there is a rapidly growing set of people who are looking for some alternative, who want to be off social media or are off social media, and they want a different way to do the things that it does. So I think that market is growing. And I think I'll give architecture an example. So my mom is one of the people who helped to really spearhead a transformation among architects, where for a long time they were just like, their job was to build buildings, to make them interesting, to make them solid, and to make them as cheap as possible to the people who wanted buildings. And then these architects started coming and saying, hey, look, a third of climate emissions are because of decisions we make in the built environment. They're because of the materials that go into buildings. They're because of heating and cooling buildings. We could make a really huge impact on climate change if we changed how we built buildings. And at that point, no one wanted to buy a green building. No one even knew how to build a green building. But people within the industry came together and said, look, we think that this change is possible. We want to make it happen. And because they decided that it's what they valued, they started understanding how to build green buildings. They started understanding how to sell green buildings to the people, first to the people who most cared about the environment. And then just they came up with things like LEED ratings that help to certify those buildings. And now it's become standard. Anyone building a building, even if they're not environmentalist, it's like, if you don't have a seal of gold environmental, if you don't have gold or platinum LEED certification, you're just not like fancy enough. Everyone's going to laugh at you. So now it's become the standard for architecture around the world. And I think about, and there, I think, a whole parallel transformation in the energy sector. But when people realize that what the direction an industry is headed is catastrophic, they can change the economics. When you change the paradigm of thinking, the economics follow. And so we shouldn't think that economics are deterministic.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Great response. I guess my worry is that kind of changing public opinion is kind of a slow reactionary process, and so it's a very difficult thing to navigate, I think.
You're changing public opinion, but you're also changing, and we see this right now. And then I want to see if there's room for one more question, then I should run. But so Meta has a really hard time retaining employees. They have to pay, salaries across the industry are sky high. Some of that is just privilege. Some of that is that these large tech companies have a really hard time retaining and attracting people because they have such a bad reputation. And so if you, when the employees who work at a company decide that it's not aligned with their values, it's really, really hard for that company to keep operating. And it becomes suddenly much, much easier for companies that are aligned with their values to keep operating and be building innovative stuff. If investors decide that, like, I'm not that personally excited about Web3 and the metaverse, I think they're kind of silly. I think Web3 is maybe a little bit of a disaster, but a bunch of investors, not everyone, a handful of investors decided that this was going to be the future, started pouring money into it. A bunch of people started making money in it, and now, now it's in headlines everywhere. Now there's sort of like this consensus that this is where the future is headed, even though I don't personally agree with that consensus. So you don't need to shift public opinion. You need to shift the opinion of a handful of people who are key stakeholders in the system. And then everyone else will, like, other people will shift because they've shifted and sort of follow the crowd. And I think at CHT, a lot of what we're doing is thinking about what are those leverage points in the system where when you shift them, a bunch of other things shift around them.
Right, awesome, thank you.
David, I think that's an excellent and sort of hopeful, forward-looking answer to end on. I know that there were a couple of other people in the queue. Is there a way that people can stay in touch with you? Is LinkedIn a good?
Yeah, I can put my LinkedIn here.
Excellent. And thank you for all of the incredible questions that came in. It was really wonderful. I know, Susan, you had a couple of final thoughts that you wanted to share.
Sure. Yeah. Well, David, thank you. You know, you have visited us before at LookUp, and I'm just thrilled to see the way our community is growing and the complexity of the conversations and the questions. Our next Leadership Lab series event will be March 30th with Julia Hoppick, who is the impact producer of The Social Dilemma, and we'll really talk about storytelling in particular. And I really encourage all of you for joining the Leadership Lab. It's for 13 to 25-year-olds. Of course, we will always invite our adult allies to events, but to continue to build this out where you can really speak to each other. And I think, David, a spatial chat session would be amazing. Our Youth Leadership Lab has used the platform, and it's really fun as well. So I thank you all for being here. I'm going to put the Eventbrite for Julia's, and then I will also come back here. I put the Leadership Lab registration in here earlier, and I will just put that in one more time. We're so excited to see all this youth empowerment. And what I want to tell you is I'm speaking in Saudi Arabia at the end of March, and I have a session where I just get to sit and share Gen Z's solutions and advocacy and campaigns. So just to continue to hear all the things you are doing is just terrific. And thank you, David, once again. And hopefully we can bring you back and answer more questions.
Thank you so much. It's fantastic to see all of you.
Great.
Have a good rest of your day, everybody. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.